I was driving my old truck home from a long day at work in Houston. It was a Monday night, and I had been on the road since early morning. My family had planned a small gathering in Austin for the following weekend, and I wanted to surprise them by returning a day early. My wife and kids were eagerly waiting for me, so I was determined to make it despite the tiredness. Around midnight, I took a route I wasn't familiar with, aiming to avoid the usual traffic jams on Interstate 10. The road was lonely, and the dense forest near the town of Luling formed a dark tunnel, making it difficult to see far ahead. My truck had been running fine, but suddenly the engine started heating up. I pulled over to the side of the road near a secluded stretch just outside of town. The temperature gauge was climbing, and I realized I'd have to wait for a while before continuing. The nearest town was miles away, and my phone had no signal. I decided to stay in the truck and wait until morning, hoping that daylight would bring some help or at least a passing. Sing vehicle. I turned on the truck's internal light and tried to pass. What's the time by playing some offline games on my phone. After a while, I heard a faint knocking sound. It started soft but grew louder. I looked out of the window but saw nothing. I dismissed it as the sound of branches tapping against the truck. The knocking grew louder and more urgent. I looked out and saw a man. His face pressed against the glass, shouting but making no sound. His frantic behavior and desperate expression unsettled me. I asked him what he wanted through the window, but he continued banging on the door without answering. Unease crept over me as I watched him. I knew something was off. I locked the doors and tried to ignore the situation. After a few minutes, he stopped and moved away, leaving me with a sense of dread. I glanced outside and saw him standing by a tree watching me with a disturbing smile. My heart raced as I realized this was no ordinary situation. He disappeared into the darkness, and I tried to calm myself, hoping he had just left. Half an hour later, headlights appeared in the... I waved frantically and shouted for help. The car pulled over and the driver, a man in his late 40s, handed me his mobile phone to call for assistance. I was relieved and grateful, but as I was speaking to a friend, I noticed something alarming. The man from earlier had returned. He was now on the other side of the truck, smashing the window with a heavy object. The glass cracked and I saw him through the broken window. The driver of the car I had flagged down grabbed my hand, a cold, unsettling smile on his face. I realized. Panicking, I jerked my hand away and shoved the driver back, slamming the truck door shut. I started the truck, even though the engine was still heating up, and sped off down the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the car following me with its headlights on. My fear intensified as I drove faster, hoping to put as much distance between myself. Off in the... Soon, I spotted another trucker coming up behind me. I flagged him down near the town of San Marcos and explained the situation. He agreed to follow me, take me to the nearest service center in Austin. As we drive together, I checked the road behind us, but the car was no longer in sight. The trucker and I reached the service center safely, where we reported the incident to the authorities. If that other truck I hadn't appeared at the right moment, I could have been in grave danger. The man might have robbed. What's murder in that desolate stretch of road, with no immediate help available? The situation could have ended much worse. I've been a part-time delivery driver for a few years now, mainly working evenings and weekends in my hometown of Denver. Before settling here, I spent a decade in Seattle, where I took on various gigs, including driving. While Seattle was a vibrant city with its own challenges, the decision to move to Denver was driven by a desire for a change of pace, at a new chapter in life. In recent years, rideshare apps like Uber and Lyft have become the go-to methods for getting around. But this story takes place before they were commonplace. Back then, the delivery and taxi services relied heavily on traditional methods to attract customers. Word of mouth, and even the occasional billboard forward to let people know we were available. It was a different time, when technology hadn't yet taken over every aspect of our lives. The winters are known for being hard. The city often experiences temperatures that drop well below freezing, and the snow can pile up quickly. I worked for a delivery service where I used my own car, return, I had the flexibility to work whenever I wanted. This setup felt like a luxury, allowing me to manage my own schedule and choose the hours I wanted to work. One New Year's Eve, I decided to put in extra hours. The holiday season typically brought in more business, and I wanted to make the most of it. I started my shift around noon, and things were busy right from the start. The city was alive with holiday shoppers, party, and people out enjoying the festivities. By the time evening rolled around, I'd been working for nearly 8 hours. I was pleased with the earnings I accumulated. As the night wore on, the weather took a turn for the worse. Snow began to fall heavily, turning the city streets into a winter wonderland that was both beautiful. Despite the worsening conditions, I decided to keep working. Around 10 p.m., I stopped at a coffee shop to warm up and grab a quick bite too. The warmth of the coffee shop was a welcome relief from the cold, and I enjoyed the brief respite before heading back. The city was starting to quiet down, and many other drivers had called in. This meant there was less competition, which was the silver lining. I picked up a couple from a downtown area and took them to their home in a less frequented part of the city. They were pleasant and I appreciated. When did the generous tip they left? As I was about to leave the area, a man emerged from the shadows near a row of parked cars and signaled me for a ride. The snow and darkness made it difficult to see him clearly. He was wearing a dog coat and seemed to be shivering, which was understandable given the weather. I stopped, and he climbed into the car. As I drove away, I asked him where he needed to go. He hesitated for a moment before handing me a crumpled note with an address scribbled on. The address was unfamiliar, and despite my years of driving in the city, I had never heard of the street before. So I'm having trouble finding this address. Yes, I said, trying to keep my tone calm. I didn't want to alarm him or make him feel uncomfortable. Just pull over here. And I could sense something was off, but I complied and parked on the side of an empty street with no street. The area was, and the absence of street lights made it feel even more isolated. Suddenly, the man lunged forward, pressing a small cold object against my neck. It was a knife, and his grip was tight. He demanded my wallet, keys, and phone. Shock and fear took over, and I fumbled to hand over my belongings. The man became more aggressive, pressing the knife harder as he yelled at me. In my panic, I must have dropped my wallet. The man, seeing my fear and confusion, grabbed it quickly. He then ordered me out of the car and ran off into the night. The aftermath of the incident was challenging. Replacing my phone lysosome bank card was a hassle, and without my car, couldn't work. The trauma from that night stayed with me for a long time. I switched to a delivery service that provided vehicles and security measures, which made me feel safer. Even now, I find myself weary of night shift. Place I'm certain, especially during the holidays, the experience taught me that not everyone shares the holiday spirit, and it's important to stay vigilant, even during what should be a joyful time of year. A few years ago, I was driving from Boston to Chicago for 2 crucial job interviews, hoping to escape my dull job in Boston for something more fulfilling. My plan was to drive straight through to save money and have some quiet time to think. I set off Thursday evening, right after work, with the goal of arriving early Friday morning. The trip would be roughly 18 hours, so I packed my car with snacks, coffee, and my favorite podcasts to keep me awake. Around 10 p.m., I was somewhere in Pennsylvania feeling the first wave of fat. I had downed 2 large cups of coffee, but my energy was waning. The highway was eerily quiet, and the headlights of passing trucks created a strobing effect on the road. I was beginning to feel the strain of the drive when I saw a figurehead. Standing on the shoulder of the highway, it was a woman in a formal navy blue dress, with a long skirt fluttering slightly in the breeze. Standing under a lone street light, my initial thought was that she might need help, but as I approached, I could see that she was alone. Her face was obscured in the dim light, but her posture was unsettling. As I drove past, I glanced back and saw her head turning slowly to follow my car's movement. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light on my imagination playing games with me due to exhaust. But the unsettling feeling stuck with me. About 30 minutes later, I saw another figure, This time, a man in a charcoal gray suit. Standing beside the highway, he was similarly motionless, and his presence was just as unnerving. I pulled over, my nerves frayed, but by the time I got out and looked around, the man had vanished. My heart raced as I got back into the car. Continued driving. By 2 o'clock in the morning, my fatigue was overwhelmed. I pulled into a small, dimly lit rest area near Gary, Indiana. The place was nearly empty except for a few long-haul trucks. I grabbed a medium coffee from the vending machine and tried to relax, but as I sat in the driver's seat, I spotted the same woman in the navy dress, now standing under a flickering street lamp just outside the rest area. Her gaze was again fixed on me. I got down the coffee and left in a hurry. I found an abandoned parking lot behind a shuttered auto repair shop and decided to catch some sleep. I reclined the driver's seat and tried to relax, but my mind was racing. Every noise outside made me jump. I started to doze off when I suddenly felt like someone was watching me. I opened my eyes and looked around. The parking lot was deserted, but as I checked the rear view mirror, I saw a fleeting glimpse of the woman in the navy dress sitting in the back seat. As a cold wave of fear washed over, I bolted out of the car, stumbling and yelling, but when I checked the back seat, it was empty. I was alone. Alone in the parking lot, my heart pounding in my chest. Despite the terror, I forced myself back into the car. I drank the rest of my coffee and pushed through the remaining hours. By the time I reached Chicago, it was already daylight. I was exhausted but relieved to have arrived. The interviews went surprisingly well. Despite my sleepless night, I managed to impress the second interview. You are and received a job offer. Later, my therapist explained, did the combination of extreme fatigue and stress had likely caused my hallucinations. The figures I saw were manifestations of my anxiety about the interviews. Even with this explanation, the haunting images of that night, the steel figures on the roadside, and the fleeting appearance in my backseat remain vivid in my mind.